Guys, thanks for coming. It is 6:05 on Monday, June 17th, a rather hot, humid one here in the east, at least. We're lucky today we have Debra Franke. Debra is the media past uh, alumni career services function at LaSalle University in Philadelphia. I've known Debra for many years.
Mhm.
Uh, I would go out and help Deborah whenever she needs some interviews or something else being done out there, meeting the students or meeting the alums. And of course, she's also being part of my network. We would also talk about opportunities where if there was somebody inside of her network who could better. But I am going to let us go. Deborah, you're on your own, and Deborah Franke.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you all here from near and far. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we are going to get started here. So tonight we're going to talk through a specific technique for how to create a resume that is targeted to a job posting. And you have my, as I said, I will send the slides out. You've got my email there. I am a career coach in private practice. My practice is called Career Transitions. So tonight we're going to talk about the job search black hole. What are implications of that? We'll spend most of our time talking about an 8-step process to create a resume that is targeted to a specific job. Look at a couple of examples and then take Q&A. So the job search black hole. What is the black hole? Well, some of you may have experienced it, or you might be experiencing it right now. You apply for jobs that are posted online and you hear nothing back. You apply to 10, 20, 50. It's kind of scary how many, the numbers that I see sometimes in discussion groups. And they're silent. There's very little feedback, very little response. And that takes its toll. It can be, at best, it's just frustrating. It can be very demotivating, and you can even get to the point where you begin to doubt your capabilities. Well, do I have anything to offer? Nobody seems to be interested in what I'm trying to offer here. So before we talk about how to get out of the black hole, let's talk a little bit about what happens when you apply online. So in any medium to large company or organization, your application is going to go through a software known as ATS, Applicant Tracking System, or Applicant Tracking Software. And you may have heard about this. Basically, it's a software used by the human resources function to keep track of where your application is in the hiring process, along with all the other applicants for that particular job, all the applicants for all the other jobs, all the applicants that ever have been, have applied to that company. So it's trying to just keep track of all that information. Now, the ATS can be programmed to do the initial filter or initial screen. It can be programmed. Now, a person tells the ATS, look for these keywords, look for these key phrases. It can analyze job titles and calculate how many years of experience somebody has doing sales or whatever the specific thing they're looking for. The more sophisticated ones do what's called context-specific analysis. So we've heard a lot about artificial intelligence. They're using a version of AI. So they're not only finding that keyword, but they're analyzing the words around it to understand the context or relevance. It's very hard to get companies to admit that they use their ATS to do an initial screen or filter. It's very hard to get any statistics on what percentage of applications get screened out by the ATS. So we're just guessing. But my guess is 25 to 75% of applications are going to be screened out. It's good a guess as any. Now, do qualified applicants get eliminated? Yes. Do unqualified applicants pass through? Yes. Why do companies do this? Why do they even use this? Well, it's pretty simple. They are overwhelmed by the number of applications they get for each role. As annoying as it is to fill out those ATS forms, okay, online, it's relatively easy to apply for a lot of jobs very quickly. And many people don't take the time to read the posting carefully to see whether they're even remotely qualified. They just apply, what's known as spray and pray. If I apply to as many jobs as possible and do enough praying, maybe something will happen. And companies just realize this is happening, so they want to get rid of all those applicants that aren't qualified. And that's why they might use their ATS. Now, let's say you make it through that filter. Then typically there's someone in the human resources function who is going to take a quick look at your resume and or the information that's been collected through the applicant tracking system when you filled that form out. And you might be invited to do a phone screen with an HR professional. And you might even do an initial phone screen and then have a recruiter call you for a conversation. Because there are multiple roles within HR. The larger the company, right, the more specialized the roles are going to be, the more likely that you might do more than one type of screen or phone call or conversation, even within the HR function. You may even have what's called asynchronous interviewing. And this is where you're given a link, you go, a question pops up, you answer the question. In some cases, you can redo your answer. In other cases, you can't. Except you're not talking to a person. You're just being recorded. And then the recruiter, when they have time to do it, will review your answers. So I don't know if any of you have encountered that, but that's out there as well. So there's all kinds of systems that HR is using, again, to get the number of applicants down to a reasonable number of qualified applicants. All right, so at some point, then some number of a reasonable number, whatever reasonable means, of applications make their way to the hiring manager, who at that point may already have a couple of candidates in mind. Now, what are these candidates that the hiring manager already has in mind? Well, they could be internal candidates, right? People the hiring manager already knows or knows of. People that hiring manager knows from his or her own network. And employee referral, right? People that employees in the organization have recommended that the hiring manager consider for an interview. Now, the hiring manager may schedule a brief phone interview. Then the final 2 or 3 candidates come in for an in-person interview and they meet the team. And then the final 2 candidates come in and do a presentation and stand on their head and chew bubblegum for an hour. And then the final candidate comes in and meets the boss's boss to get the final blessing. And then there is what we've been after all along, an offer. Whew. So, depending on how long you've been in your job search, some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Multiple steps, okay? It feels like sometimes, can't they just make a decision? What, I have to go through another stage in this process? And again, from the standpoint of the company, right? Why are they doing all this? They are trying to first weed out unqualified or less qualified candidates. And then obviously, once you get to interviewing with the hiring manager is trying to find the best fit candidate. All right, so what are some implications of all of this? Well, in terms of the resume, here's a few implications. One is that when you're writing your resume, you have to write it with the mindset that there's several audiences. There's the applicant tracking software, there's the people in HR, there's the hiring manager at a minimum, right? You've got at least 3 audiences there. It needs to be keyword rich. It needs to be full of the words, the phrases that either that software or a person is going to be looking for to determine whether you are potentially qualified. And keywords, I'm gonna, when I send Ernie the slides here in a PDF, I will also send you a link to an article I've written about keywords, what they are, and how to figure out what the keywords are for the types of roles that you're interested in. So those are the words or phrases likely to be used again by ATS or the recruiter to determine if you're qualified. So another implication is that it's really crucial that you develop connections within that company. The phrase internal advocate. So these are people in the company who will advocate for you. And the best resource I have found for this is a book called The 2-Hour Job Search by Steve Dalton. Be sure you get the second edition. I don't get any kickback from recommending the book. I just think it's a very methodical step-by-step approach. How do I develop a list of target companies? How do I then have conversations with people? And how do I continue to grow that professional connection? So excellent resource. That's all I'm going to say about it for tonight. And then you hear a lot about networking, right? So building professional connections in your field, in your industry. What does that allow you to do? It allows you to uncover the hidden job market or the unadvertised job market, to learn about openings before they get posted, and build connections into companies you don't even know about to put on your target list in the first place. And I'm sure there have been programs, and there will be programs on how to do that third thing. All three of these, I believe, are really, really crucial. Today, we're going to focus just on the first one, looking at the resume and how do we make sure that it not only gets past the software, but also that you are doing the best job possible demonstrating your qualifications. So I'm going to walk you through an 8-step, yes, 8 steps process on how to create a resume that is targeted to a specific job. And you might be asking yourself, well, when would I want to put this much effort into a resume for a specific job? Well, here's when you want to do it. When the resume you're using isn't getting the results that you want it to. If it's getting you the results, if it's getting you interviews, okay? Obviously, you're not going to get an interview probably with every job you apply to, but if you're getting interviews and your resume is working for you, then you don't need to do this. But if it's not getting the results that you're after, then you may want to consider this. Now, before we dive in here, I want to say something extremely important, and that is this. Your resume is not a history of everything you've done. And I see so many resumes that are just that, right? The person is trying to cram everything they've ever done or accomplished into their resume. They're very proud of all their accomplishments, and they want the world to know about it. No, that's great. You can have a separate document that you look at occasionally, okay? But a resume is a marketing document, and its purpose is to demonstrate your qualifications for where you want to go. And that's what the focus of this webinar is going to be. How do you create that kind of a resume? All right, step 1, I call create a resume shell. So here's Tommy Tech. Here's the resume he started with. And a resume shell basically strips out all the content. And so you're going to have your name and your contact info. You're going to have a work experience section where you list your companies and your titles and your dates. You're going to have an education section and a skills section, most likely. Then some of the optional sections you may want to consider: a profile or professional summary that would go at the top. Perhaps you would have a section called other relevant experience, and I'll talk some more about that later on. But these are other things that you have done or are doing that are relevant to the job but don't fall in the work experience section. And then you may have a section called professional development, which answers the question, how is this person keeping current in the field? And we'll talk a little bit about that as well towards the end. All right, so you created your resume shell, and now you're going to turn your attention to the job posting. So first you're going to copy the entire job posting and then paste it into a Word document. And when you do that, you want to use this paste, what's called keep text only. And what that does is it strips out a lot of the formatting that you're bringing over from wherever you're copying it from. And then you're going to take out, so on the left there, you can see there's a bunch of stuff that I can take out that I copied over, but I don't really need. All right, so I'm going to get rid of any unnecessary text, any leftover formatting. And now I'm ready to take the next step. Okay. And what you're going to do is create a bullet for each thing that employer wants this person to do, and each knowledge or skill they want this person to use or have. This is where the fun begins. All right. Now, many job postings have an opening sentence or paragraph that gives you a kind of big picture overview of the role. What is the essence of the position? And this can be really helpful in writing your summary, your qualifications profile at the top, your professional summary. Okay. And it's really pay attention to this because it gives you that overall big picture of what this role is about and why is it important and what's it trying to accomplish in the organization. And then you may have some stuff here or at the very beginning or at the very end, a paragraph, several paragraphs about the organization, helpful to read. But where we're going to focus on are the parts of the job posting that talk about what they want the person to do and the qualifications that they're looking for. And so if you look at this, I'm going to leave this up for a moment and see if you have any questions about it, because this is an important step in the process. You're going to take that job posting and bullet it. Now, depending on how it's written, it could be that each of their items is a single bullet and you're done. But you've seen job postings where there's a sentence that goes on for 5 lines and it has about 8 different things that person is going to do. Okay. And so you want to separate those out because that's going to help you in the subsequent steps of this process. So you're looking for things like the word and, or the word or semicolons or verbs, right? So establishes and directs and negotiates. You're looking for lists. Okay. So these are the different areas that the person is going to be working in. You're looking for commas that show you there's a list here. You're looking for long sentences, paragraphs that you want to break down a little bit more. So this does a couple things. One is it slows you down. It really makes you read the job posting carefully, and it gets you ready for the next step in the process. But let me pause there and see if you have any questions so far about what I've said. And Ernie, I'm going to assume you're monitoring the chat. If there's any questions there.
There are no questions in the chat.
Okay, and anybody want to unmute and ask any questions so far?
So I guess the one question I have is you talked about that, and I think it's excellent that you're talking about the fact that length of resume is not all that important these days. You want to try and give them the flavor of who you are. However, like for me, in my experience, the last 8 to 9 months has been very frustrating that despite doing some of the things that you've done here, but not to the extent that you're talking about, but still not getting any results by really trying to tailor it to the job description. But how do you make it condensed and concise so that you aren't getting into 2 and 3 pages long, even if you're just talking about how you're approaching here?
So a couple thoughts there. One is I am not a believer that every resume should be 1 page. I know you hear that. Okay. I think most professionals with significant work experience are going to have a 2-page resume. Having said that, the most important information should probably be on that first page. The ATS doesn't care how long it is. It doesn't care how it's formatted. The thing to keep in mind, a person looking at your resume is going to not read it. They're going to skim it. So you want to make it very easy to skim, and you'll see when I show you examples. For instance, in the professional summary, I recommend bullets, not a paragraph format. And a couple other suggestions I have to make the resume more skimmable. So the other thing is to be sure that everything you have in there is relevant to the job. And the process I'm suggesting here will make sure that happens, because you're not going to put anything in that isn't relevant to that particular job posting. So, you know, you may, for a particular job, the bullets you have may only cover 25% of the job, but that's because that's the 25% that's relevant to where you're going.
Gotcha. I guess, yeah, and I mean, it's one of those things where you're trying to figure out, at least for me, trying to figure out where do you stop?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and that's where, you know, you start thinking to yourself, well, is this enough? Is it not enough? And whatever. But either way, I've tried both ways and haven't been very successful of late.
Okay.
So it's been very frustrating.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I understand the frustration side of the whole process. You know, and again, if the resume by itself, then going back to that slide where I talked about implications, are you creating internal advocates in target organizations? Are you developing professional connections widely? That those also, because as soon as you have that internal reference, then you don't have to be as close a match on paper, that because you've got that internal referral.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so we've bulleted the entire job posting, and in particular the section, here's what we want you to do, here's our requirements or qualifications. All right, next, you're going to get out your highlighters. Now, at this point, if you have access to a printer, you could print out the resume one-sided and grab a set of highlighters, or you can use the highlight feature on your computer and do it up on the screen. So an alum pointed this out to me. He said, oh, it's kind of like a traffic light, red, yellow, green. I said, gee, you're right, except we're going to turn it upside down. And we're going to talk about green, yellow, and red. And green is like, yes, yes. Yellow is, well, sorta, and red is no. And let me explain what I mean by that. So in the job posting that you have bulleted, you're going to highlight in green things you say, oh yeah, I can do that. And I have something I can put in my resume to prove it. I have something I can put in. So typically we think of that coming from our paid work, but it could also come from volunteer work. It could come from continuing education or professional development. If your education is within the last 5 years, you could have bullets in the education section. It could even be a hobby or a side business that you have, okay? And students in very recent grad, it could be extracurricular activities. So sometimes we need to think a little more broadly about where that proof or evidence can be coming from. So that's green. Yellow, the kind of sort of is, well, I don't actually have anything I can put in my resume, but I read that and I know I can do it. I can learn it quickly. It's not going to be, there's no reason they shouldn't hire me. Nothing like a double negative, right? No reason they shouldn't hire me because of that. Now, let me give you an example from me. So 13 years ago, when I applied to LaSalle, there was a line in the job posting that said something like, oversee an ongoing series of career-related webinars for alumni. Well, I had taken webinars at that point, but I had never presented one. And I had never been like the admin, like Ernie is for this one, okay? So that would have been a yellow for me. But even if something's a yellow, there still might be things you can put in the resume. So for instance, I certainly developed curriculum. I certainly collaborated with other professionals to develop continuing education and professional development programs. I certainly learned other technology. I ran pilot programs and then assessed those and then launched a new initiative based on what we learned from that. So I had a lot of pieces that were relevant that if I chose to, I could include in the resume, even though that specific thing I hadn't done before. And there was no question in my mind that I'd be able to do it. Okay. So that's what we're going to use yellow for. Blue. Oh, wait a minute. Blue isn't in the traffic light. Oh, well, I know, but we're going to use blue. So blue is, I'm not sure I know what they're talking about or what that means. Sometimes it's an acronym that they're using. Sometimes it might be a specific software you're not familiar with. Sometimes it's the way something's worded. Okay. So blue, not sure what that means. And then here's our red. Red is in that qualifications requirement section for qualification requirement you don't have. Let's look at what this looks like. So this is that opening sentence or paragraph that gives the big picture. And again, I said this is really important because it gives you that overview of what the role is. But sometimes it's so broad, it's really not that helpful to color code it. You can if you want to, but let's look specifically at the responsibilities, what they want the person to do. Okay. So remember, green is yes. I've done that. I have something I can put in my resume to prove it. Okay. What did we say? Yellow is, I haven't done that before, but I'm pretty sure I could learn it quickly or easily. And maybe I haven't done that, but maybe I've handled something similar. Okay. And at least I can show my ability to learn how to do something new. Notice that a given bullet might be a mix of yellow and green. So in this case, this person has worked with Sage Intacct, but they didn't drive the integration of it. Okay. It was already in place in their previous employer. Now, maybe they drove the integration of something else. Okay. Or maybe they think about, well, what's involved in driving the integration of something? I have a lot of those project management pieces and collaborating across department pieces. I could include those things. Okay. Now, so, and then blue is, I'm not sure what they mean by intricate. And actually I could guess what that means, but I had to pick something to put blue in here. Okay. So let me stop there again and see if you have any questions. Remember the green, yes, it can be paid employment, but it also could be community volunteer work, something you're doing with a professional association. Maybe you have mentored a student in a formal mentor program. It could be a continuing ed or professional development that you've been part of. Okay. Even if you haven't done it in your actual work, you know, you took a webinar or it was in a course that you took or whatever. It could be a hobby. It could be a side business that you have. Any of those things would qualify for the green. So again, let me stop and see if you have any questions right now. Okay, I'm gonna take that as a no. All right, so here is the section that is, hold on, I need to catch up in my notes here. The requirements or qualifications. So in this part, everything's either going to be green, right? I have proof or evidence. Blue, I'm not sure I know what it means, or red. That's a qualification I don't have. So there wouldn't be anything yellow here. Okay. Either you have a qualification or you don't. Now, for the items that are red, okay, that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't apply, and we'll talk about more about that in a moment. But if you keep seeing the same things coming up as a red, you might want to ask yourself, what can I do to at least get some level of understanding in this, even if it's not proficiency. So for a student or recent grad, perhaps you covered in a course, even though you haven't used it in the workplace, and you can have a bullet in the education section that covers that. Or again, professional development, a webinar, self-study, you watch some videos, whatever, and you can include that in the professional development section of your resume. Okay, any questions on how to color code that part of the job posting? All right, now you've got a really important decision to make. Are you going to apply for this job or not? So first of all, you're going to look at the red. The red is what? Qualifications you don't have. Okay, how much of it is red? Is it likely there's going to be other candidates who don't have any red or don't have as much red as you? Okay. And just like I just said here, red might indicate a skills, knowledge, or experience gap. And ask yourself, what can I do to fill that gap, even if it's partial? So an alum I worked with was seeing Salesforce showing up in maybe a third of the jobs he was interested in. He didn't have any Salesforce experience. So what did he do? He watched some videos on Salesforce, and he found somebody who worked at a nonprofit and used Salesforce in that nonprofit, and talked to that person and learn more about how they used it. So in his professional development section on his resume, he was able to create a bullet that he was learning about the use of Salesforce in nonprofit donor and volunteer management through self-study. So he at least got that keyword on his resume, right? So if they're using that, and then in an interview, if he was asked about it, he could easily explain what that meant, what it was he was doing, and how he was trying to learn more about how Salesforce was used in a nonprofit. Now, you do not have to be 100% match. Like I said, just because there's some red there, just because there's some requirements or qualifications you don't match, okay? That's okay. If it says required, you might want to think about it, okay? But is there a way to even get around that? Maybe. Again, if you have that internal advocate, that internal referral, it's going to be less important than if you don't have that. Men tend to apply for a job, even if it's not a great match. And women tend not to apply, even if they're a reasonably good match. So I encourage women in particular, if you're hesitating and you're like, well, I'm not a perfect match. Well, are you reasonably good? Okay. And we're going to ask a motivation question here. If your motivation is high, then consider applying. All right. Do you remember what yellow is? So yellow is up in the section where they talk about what they want the person to do. And yellow are those things that you don't have any proof or evidence for. You haven't done that before. So how much of it is yellow? Is it 95% yellow? Well, there's probably going to be candidates that are going to be far more qualified than you. Okay. How significant do those seem to be? And there's no like magic formula to decide whether or not to apply as you analyze it. These are just some things to consider. A really important question is, how motivated am I for this job to put in the effort to customize my resume? Because if I'm not especially motivated, then why waste my time on it? But if I am highly motivated, then I'm going to do the best job possible to demonstrate my strong qualifications for the role. And another question is, do I have an internal advocate in the organization? Is there someone in the organization that, does the organization have a formal employer referral program or an informal? If not, they always have an informal employer referral program. So is there someone in that organization that can vouch for me? Because that will impact the likelihood of you being able to get that resume seen by a hiring manager. So we're going to assume that our example here has decided to apply and is going to move on now to the 5th step. All right, so now it's time to gather the evidence. So think of yourself, think of a court of law, okay? All those courtroom dramas you see on TV. And you're the lawyer there, and you're trying to argue a case. Or remember those papers you wrote in college where you had a thesis and you had to support it with evidence and you lined up the evidence. I mean, that's what you're doing here. Okay. So prove to me, show me through your resume how you're qualified for this role. So what you're going to do is certainly wherever there's green, right? Because you've already said, yeah, I have something I can put in my resume. You're going to start jotting down in the margins. Well, this is what I could put in my resume that's related to that. Okay. So in this case, the person says, well, I have 3 years of experience with Sage Intact. And oh yeah, I trained an intern on how to use it. Yeah, okay. Let's see, that one job I had, I was responding to an average of 5 calls per week from customers regarding invoices. And oh, let's see, prepare and managing budgets. Well, I did develop a budget for that Armory project. And oh, I remember I uncovered an error in contractor timesheets for that. Okay, so you're just jotting enough down to jog your memory. All right, you're not writing out full sentences at this point. And, in some cases, again, maybe you didn't do exactly that, but you did something that's similar or use the same skills. We'll put that down. Okay. So this is, you're preparing here you're thinking about what you're going to include in the resume that is going to support your qualifications for this particular job. Now, it's not a one-to-one correspondence, so one proof point might cover multiple bullets here, okay? Then you're going to continue on, do the same thing under the requirements qualification section. So here's an example where he doesn't have 2 years of a supervisory experience. He has 1 year. But as he thinks about it, he said, I did have that intern and, I was kind of in charge of them for this. So I could say that I mentored an intern. It's not quite the same as supervising, but, I did have to work with them on their work and check in on them and then be available. And then at the end, I had to write up a report, blah, 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 and sit down with them and discuss it. It's kind of like supervising someone. Okay. So I'm going to put that in there. So here's a case where the person didn't match the exact requirement here of 2 years, but they did have a year and they had this other thing and they're really interested in the job. So they're going to go ahead and apply. Because, you don't know what things that hiring manager is willing to be flexible on and which things they're not willing to be flexible on. So here, team management skills. Scratch. Oh yeah. Let's see, on my professional association, I'm the chair of the program committee. That requires organization. That requires managing a team. Sure does. Okay. And organizational skills. Well, organizational skills, that means a lot of things, right? But it could mean like project management. And there was that job where I had 5, for half a year, I had those 5 projects going all together. And I used project management software to track tasks and deadlines. So you're just jotting down ideas, okay? And again, it's not necessarily a one-on-one. Bachelor's degree in accounting, that's going to show up in the education. You don't need to put that anywhere else on the resume. Now, as you're doing this, you notice I marked something in purple here. Using project management software to track tasks and deadlines. And then on the previous page, trained intern, uncovered error in contractor timesheets. So what these are specific examples of this person doing something And many of you might be familiar with something called CAR or SAR or STAR stories. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So I tend to call them CAR stories, but they're also often called SAR or STAR or PAR or whatever stories, okay? And very often this comes up when you're preparing for an interview. Because anytime an interviewer asks you, tell me about a time when, blah, 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 okay? There was a conflict with a colleague or a client. Give me an example of. Give me an example of analyzing data and summarizing it in a way that communicated important insights, okay? That's called behavioral interviewing. And what that interviewer is looking for is not a generalization, okay? Oh, I'm really good at blah, 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 blah. They want a specific example. And that's what the CAR story is, a specific example. Now, I'm going to use the acronym CAR. You can use whatever you want, okay? So CAR stories are stories, true stories, not made up stories of you in action, you at your best, you demonstrating your qualifications. So I think CAR stories are not just helpful preparing for an interview, but they're also helpful in writing your resume. Because your CAR stories paint a picture of how you do what you do, and also the value you bring to an organization. And they differentiate you from others because the way you go about doing something isn't the way others go about doing it. And they get away from generalizations, okay? I'm really good with people. Well, what does that mean? Give me a CAR story, and now I know what you mean by I'm really good with people. So there are three parts to the story. Part one is the stage, the setting. So what's the challenge? What's the situation? What's the task here? What's the need? What's the problem? What's the opportunity? Set the stage for me. Part two of the story. What did you do and how did you do it? What skills were you using? You want to be very specific and detailed here. So for instance, if you say or write, I got the team to agree, how did you get the team to agree? Okay, get specific. If in telling your CAR story in the action part, you find yourself saying we this and we that, you need to change that to I. What did you do? Now, it's fine to talk about things you did as part of a group or team. That's fine. But what you need to do is talk about what you were doing as part of that group or team, not what the group or team were doing, right? Because the hiring manager isn't hiring the group or the team. They're looking to hire you. So, you know, maybe you stood with your back to the wall watching everybody else get the work done and you applauded once in a while. Well, if that's what you did, then wear it proudly. Okay, that's your gift. So that's the action part. And then the R, the third part is the result, the benefit, the outcome. What difference did that make? What value did that bring to the organization? So again, many of you are probably familiar with this from preparing for interviews. Have you thought about developing CAR stories as part of the resume process? Sometimes these are called accomplishment stories, okay? So I kind of covered this. You're going to use CAR stories in job interviews, certainly in networking conversations, performance reviews and salary discussions. You want to get specific, right? You don't want to just say, hey, I did great things for the company. You want to get specific about what you did and what you accomplished. And today we're talking about how to use them when you're creating your resume, putting mini CAR stories on your resume because they are the proof or evidence that you can do the job. CAR stories get away from generalizations and demonstrate what makes you distinctive. In other words, why should someone hire you and not someone else? I maintain that is one of the most crucial questions of the job search. You've got to be able to answer that. First to yourself, and then to the world, okay? And sometimes that's very hard to figure out. But car stories will help you get there. Because the way I want to go about this, the way I approach it is this way. Okay. What sets you apart from other candidates? Car stories begins to get at your professional brand, who you are, how you do what you do, what makes you unique and special, your distinctives, and what you can do for the organization. So I asked an alum this question, okay? What sets you apart from others? What's distinctive about you? And the alum said, well, I've been told that. I'm good at anticipating conflict and potential resistance to change and turning that around to be a positive for the people involved. And I was like, whoa, that's cool. Let me make 2 points here. One is he started off by saying, I've been told that. And why do I think that's significant? I've been working with adults in career transition for over 30 years. And if there's one thing that I see over and over, it's this. We tend to downplay our own strengths. Hey, if I can do it, it's no big deal. Okay? I can see strengths and gifts and talent in others, right? Very often the things that I find difficult or I don't think I do well or that don't come easily to me, but I see that in someone else, I label that as, wow, they're really good at that. They're talented at that, right? Kind of get what I call gift envy, okay? But it's so hard to see it in myself. Why? Again, because if I can do it, it's no big deal. And that's why paying attention to the feedback you get from others, okay? Sarah, I noticed with our intern how patient you are in explaining things to them and that you really give them the opportunity to ask lots of questions. And Sarah's thinking, yeah, so what, big deal. But see, not everybody's like that, Sarah. And that's part of what makes Sarah distinctive, okay? Joe, I saw in the meeting how you were able to take several people's ideas and pull them together into sort of a coherent whole and present that to the group for discussion. And Joe's thinking, yeah, so what? No big deal. I do that all the time. But it is a big deal. That's part of what makes Joe distinctive. So anyway, back to my alum here. He told me he'd gotten this feedback, and I said, that's really awesome. But do you see how that's a generalization? I'm good at anticipating conflict and turning it around to be. I said, go write a car story and send it to me. And he did. And I'm going to send you a link to this page. So I'm not expecting you to read this, okay? But here's the 3 parts. Here's the context. Here's the situation. Here's the action. Here's what he did. Here was the result or the outcome. Now, again, don't need to read it right now. I just want you to see the 3 parts. My suggestion to you is, as you're preparing your resume, you take the time to write out some car stories that you're going to include on your resume that, again, are relevant to the job you're applying for. Now, the first time you do this, it's going to take some time, right? You're going to open up a Word document. You're going to have 1 car story per page. Sometimes that action part could be several paragraphs long. You're thinking, oh my gosh, Debra, this is ridiculous. But guess what? The next one you do, maybe you only need 1 or 2 more. And you're going to build this amazing library of car stories. And you know what? You're going to thank me when it's time to get ready for an interview because you've done more than half of your interview prep already. Because you've already developed these car stories and you're already working with them. So by writing them out, you have access to them then in the future. So this is what he sent me. This is an example of a car story. But you're not going to put all that in a resume, are you? No, you're not. So then you create what I call a mini car story. It's a synopsis of that car story, keeping in mind the skills and experience you want to highlight. So for instance, if this alum wanted to emphasize he's somebody who makes processes more efficient because he sees in the job description that that's what part of the job is all about. Maybe it's the core of the job, Okay. So he's going to write that 3-paragraph story this way. He's going to start with the implied pronoun I. It's never written, but it's implied. Then what's called an action verb. Okay. And I'm going to send Ernie, and he'll forward to you a nice list of action verbs in case you don't already have one. Just skimming through that list, you can, oh, wow, here's I keep using the same words over and over for my verb at the beginning. Streamline. Ooh, I like that. Let's use that action verb. Okay. So I streamlined budget templates. How? By involving plant managers in redesign. What was the result? Creating buy-in and reducing update time to almost 0. There it is. It's the mini car story. This is what he puts on his resume under whatever job it is that he did this. But let's say he wants to emphasize his what I call superpower of anticipating conflict and resistance to change and turning that around to be a positive. He might write that same car story this way. Here's the action verb, overcame. I overcame initial hostility to upgrading budget templates. How? By seeking input from the plant controllers, resulting in a streamlined process that incorporated their concerns and insights. So depending on what he wants to emphasize is going to determine how he writes that mini car story. And so one car story, right? You're going to use in multiple ways, not in the same resume. Okay. But in different resumes, you might use them somewhat differently. So let me, just a couple comments. I do highly recommend taking the time to write out your car stories, saving them in a Word document, at least at a minimum, make some notes, right? C, write what the challenge is, even if it's just a phrase. A, some action steps, even if it's not full sentences. R, what was the outcome or result? Couple phrases, okay? One car story may cover several bullets in the job description. And not every bullet in the job posting requires a mini car story. And you're going to put it into the resume where it occurred. All right, let me stop there and see if there's any questions so far. And then Ernie,
Question.
yes.
Going back to there was a bullet point several slides back that you talked about what can I do for you? What am I going to bring to the organization? How am I going to be a benefit to that organization? Right? I believe a lot in that because being on the other side of that table where I have done years and years of interviewing, that's what I was looking for. What are you going to do for us?
Yeah.
So I've been reading some topics on LinkedIn talking about what they call a future resume, meaning my experience is X. This is what I'm going to bring to an organization, and focusing in on that to match up with why your skill sets are going to be that important. And that's how you can connect the dots. What's your thoughts on that?
I love that concept. When I talk about the professional summary, that's a place where you can do that. I would love to, if you can share with Ernie and he can forward to me links to some articles. I would love to learn more about exactly what's meant there. But yeah, again, a resume is not a history, right? It's marketing you for some future desired role in an organization. And so, yeah, the more you can project, here's what I can do for you, right? The more you can do that translation for the reader, the better, the higher the likelihood they're going to see the connection between your experience and what they're looking for.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Paul, looks like you raised your hand.
Yes, thanks, Debra. Quick question for you. I know there's, like you said, if you don't have an internal advocate or you're not working through a recruiter, I've heard a couple different numbers, and I'm not sure if there's an exact science to this. When you're looking at breaking out the qualifications as you did and then lining up your resume, what percentage do you think most, or what's your professional advice on what percentage should most job seekers hit as far as qualifications go? 75%, 90%? I've heard a lot of different numbers thrown out there. I'd imagine it has to be well north of 50, or there's no magic number at all.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I would guess in most cases, well north of 50, unless for some reason that organization is having significant difficulty filling the position. and they are open to people from a wide variety of backgrounds, right? But yeah, generally what, I mean, again, I wish there was a formula, that we could plug into and it would ding, say, yes, you have a high likelihood, or no, you don't. So yeah, I think on the things that seem to be most crucial, most important, you better come out pretty high on that other stuff that you can pick up along the way, less important. And again, the motivation piece, I think, is really important. If this is a role that really, really interests you, then you're going to be willing to put in the work and think about how the experience that you have through those car stories and mini car stories, how that is relevant, even though you don't have the specific experience they're looking for. But yeah, I wouldn't even know, yes, more than 50. And it's hard to know unless you have someone on the inside telling you, for any particular type of role in a particular industry at a particular level in a particular geographic area, right? Are they getting 20 applicants or 200 per position, right? You don't even know that. So I know I didn't answer your question.
I know it was a tough one too, because I've heard a lot of different
Yeah.
answers there. And I think, like you said, I don't know that you can really answer that. It all depends on the situations, what you know, who you know. And really having, like you said, that insider track is always going to be the winner.
It is, but the better job you do of showing how your experience is relevant and what you can do for them, which is the point of all this, hopefully that's going to increase the likelihood of you getting to that interview.
Okay, thank you.
Ernie, what time are we at now?
Right now, we're at 7:02.
Okay, so I think we're going to have to unfortunately skip the breakout. But just so you know, in the breakouts, I was going to have each of you share a car story with each other. So some of you might be relieved that you're not getting to do that, and others might think, oh, daggone, that would have been really fun. But we're going to move on. Okay, so we've talked a lot about gathering the supporting evidence. You saved the job posting, you bulleted it, you color-coded it, you jotted notes about what you want to put in the resume. You've written some car stories. You created your mini car stories. Now we're going to put it all in there. Oh, sorry. So you've gathered it. And so now we're going to put that in the resume. So here's an example. Here's Tommy Tech. Okay. And so Tommy has developed some mini car stories, and he has put them into his resume in whatever job he did that particular thing. Now, not every bullet is necessarily going to be a mini car story. Okay, you might have some things that are more generalized, like you would typically see, but you do want to avoid just listing tasks and responsibilities you had in the past. Okay, take it up a notch from that at a minimum. And if it's if your job title in a previous role, people in your field are going to have a general sense of what people do, so you don't need to repeat all of that. Okay. All right, so this is plugging in to the resume, and then it's time to fill the holes. HOLES. And what kind of holes are you going to have? Well, here's three types. You're going to have bullet holes, okay, summary or profile hole, and then potentially other sections of the resume. So let's look at each of these. So what do I mean by bullet holes? So here's Tommy, and his current job. He's been at it for a while. He's got 3 bullets that he thinks are really powerful, but he just has this sense like he needs another one there. And then the job right before that, he's only got 1, and gosh, it's fairly recent, and he knows he did a lot of great stuff, so he feels like he should have 2 more bullets there. And it could be by using the process I've outlined, you might have a job that's on your resume. Remember that resume shell you created, you ended up with no bullets. That's entirely possible. Because again, you're starting with the posting, putting the evidence in, right? Now's the time to fill in those holes. Again, applicant tracking software couldn't care less, right? It doesn't care how many bullets you have. It might care where on the resume, is it in a current job or a job from 20 years ago, a certain keyword shows up, right? It might care about that. But it's not going to count how many bullets you have and pass judgment on you, okay? So we all intuitively kind of know what a resume should look like. And so if there are holes, H-O-L-E-S, we want to fill them. And so you would ask yourself, okay, let's say maybe Tommy ended up with no bullets for his second most recent position. And so Tommy says to himself, what did I do in that job that's relevant to this position in some way? The one that I'm applying for. So I didn't think of it when I started with the posting and came up with evidence, but now let me think about the job. Oh, you know, there was that, you know, it was 5% of the job, but that 5% is very relevant to this job I'm interested in. So let me create a bullet about that. And sometimes it's not what you did, but how you did it. And let me differentiate. Silly example. Okay, what I did, I got the room painted. Okay, that's not relevant. How I did it could be very relevant. Did I research painting techniques and theory meticulously? Did I develop a detailed plan? Did I create a spreadsheet with a timeline and cost analysis? Did I follow a prescribed step-by-step process I had developed? You know, is that how I did it? Or did I buy a couple buckets of paint and some rollers and invite my friends over and put a drop cloth and said, I'll see you in a couple hours and I'll bring some pizza and beer. Okay, both people got the room painted, didn't they? So it's not what they did, it's how they went about it that is going to be relevant. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, so filling in bullets on the resume itself. And again, the part of a particular job that you're going to talk about in the resume might have been a relatively small part of the role, but it's the part of the role that's relevant. And so that's what you're going to include. Now, how about this profile or professional summary at the top? It's called a number of different things. Sometimes people have it without calling it anything, but it's clearly an attempt to kind of summarize, here's who I am as a professional. And there's lots of different formats this can take, and I do not want to imply that the one I'm going to talk about here is the only way to do it. If you have one you like, or you've seen one on someone else's resume and you like it, that's fine, okay? It's a summary. It's a capsule summary that's saying, here's who I am and what I can do for you. If your profile is achieving that, great, okay? Here's a format. It's the one I use, and it's the one that when I work with people on resumes, I typically recommend. But again, it's not the only format, okay? So the first blank is what I call a professional identity. It could be a job title, okay? But it's often larger than that. So for me, it would be career development professional, right? That's not a job title, but it is my professional identity. The with statement can be anything you want, okay? And it doesn't even have to be the word with. It just so happens the way I write them, it's almost always professional identity with. The with can be, you know, experience in particular industries or particular types of companies, or you're going to emphasize the focus of your work or something special or unique about it. Okay, just to finish out that sentence. Some people don't even have, they just have the professional identity and they don't have the with statement. Then the bullets underneath, go back to the job posting, read that sentence or paragraph summary at the top, and ask yourself, what are the 3 to 6 things they want this person to do and do well, which I can support in the rest of the resume? If I were to boil this job down, to 3 to 6 things, what would it be? And that's what you're going to put here. As long as every single one of them you've got support for in the rest of the resume. So again, I'm reiterating, this is the only way to write them. I do recommend, because people skim resumes, they don't read them. I do recommend an opening statement with bullets that people can skim as opposed to a paragraph format. That's my personal recommendation. So here's an example. Here's Tommy Tech. So in your head, I am even though it's not there, I am a technical project manager. Now, that could be the title of a specific job, but it's really how his professional identity at this point of his career, okay? And here's his with statement, extensive experience leading virtual distributed teams in technical development programs. And then here are those 3 to 6 bullets. As he looks at this job that he's applying for, that he's interested in, this is what he thinks they're looking for someone to do and do well in the role. So these are not specific examples. The specific examples are in the rest of the resume. This is saying, here's who I am. You hire me, this is what you're going to get. This is what you're going to get out of me. And then the whole rest of the resume says, let me show you. Okay, let me stop there. See what questions or comments you have. I'm interested, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, the one who mentioned the future resume.
That'd be me, Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin, do you see how you can use this profile section
Sure.
to
Yeah,
do
no,
that part of it?
I like the idea of the bullet point formatting versus, like you said, the paragraph. Like, and I guess the question I was kind of playing in my head, you know, thinking about, and I always knew it as the STAR method from my days of interviewing, but all the same, I get it. That do you say in here like help coach somebody from, you know, the bottom of the pile to President's Club?
Yeah.
You know, is that a bullet point that because I know I can come up with all the details and the ways that we did that and all that, but is that capture somebody's attention maybe?
So I personally would not put that in the profile. I would put that in the rest of the resume wherever that occurred.
Gotcha.
Okay. I have seen profiles that the bullets are sort of kind of key accomplishment statements like that.
Right.
That are again relevant to the position. Okay. And I'm not opposed to that. It's just not kind of the format that I typically use. But if you want to use this profile or summary or professional summary or whatever to kind of highlight key, increased account from X million to X million in certain amount of time kind of thing, really highlight some of those really solid, strong, and you want to do that here. I've seen resumes like that, and I think that can work well also.
Now I can see, I'm already thinking in my head about, you know, how I could take my paragraph version of this and break it down into bullet points. So I like the idea.
Okay. Any questions from anybody so far? So we're still filling in the holes. We filled in our bullet holes. We filled in our profile or summary at the top if we decided to have one. And then other sections of the resume, my guess is you're all going to have an education section. You may want to have an other relevant experience section. So again, this could be things like volunteer work with a professional association, a side business that you have, even a hobby that might be relevant to the role. Professional development, an optional section, but answers the question, how is this person keeping current in the field? And then skills, most resumes have a skills section, and you're really emphasizing your technical skills here. So what kind of software have you worked with? And then all the collaborative software is really big now, right? So all the OneDrives and Google Drives and Teams and Zoom and all that kind of stuff. So you under skills, you might want to have a couple categories, right? So accounting software, data analysis software, and collaborative software, okay? And then colon, and then list the specific ones that you have experience with. So these are some of the other things you may want to add to the resume. All right. So now we're ready for a final check. Hey, that didn't take long, did it? And so you may be already familiar with some of these tools. There's a number of tools out there, ones that I'm familiar with, JobScan, Skill Syncer, and then you can use artificial intelligence such as ChatGPT, where basically the software or the AI is comparing the job posting to your resume and identifying any keywords that you're missing. So things like hard skills, soft skills, other keywords or key phrases that are missing. So I do recommend as a final check. Now, just because it says, you know, you're missing a particular word, you need to use your brain and say, do I really think that's a keyword that someone might program the applicant tracking software to use that to filter or not? So just because one of these programs comes up with a particular word or phrase doesn't necessarily mean you have to get it in there. But it can be helpful. Oh yeah, of course, I want to get that in there. I don't know why I didn't. Okay. And then here's the final, you know, this is your final check questions are right here. Have I demonstrated my qualifications for the position as best I can? And is everything in the resume relevant? If it's not relevant, why is it in there? Take it out. Okay. It's in there because it means so much to me. Well, that's great. Keep a master copy of your resume somewhere where you put everything in there and all the things that are special. But the only thing that goes in here is what's relevant. Now let's look at a couple of samples. So here's Tommy. We already looked at parts of his, but this is what his resume looks like, just the first part of it, just put together. He's got his name, his contact info, and then he's got his profile, and then he has his work experience with his mini car stories. So he says that he leads virtual distributed teams, so teams at multiple locations doing technical development programs. And look at his very first bullet. I led a team of IT security consultants and software developers, both in-house and those at multiple client sites, etc. Okay, so right there, he's got his proof point, and so on and so forth. Okay, here's my resume from a few years ago, but just showing you another summary. Again, that professional identity piece, my with statement, and then those 3 to 6 things that I think they're looking for and that I'm going to include in my resume somehow. Now, one thing I want to point out here is that in the case of that particular resume, a lot of my work experience came from one job. And this can happen to you. You end up with 15 bullets under one job. Guess what? People don't read these days. If people see a long list, they're not going to read it. That's just a reality. So again, applicant tracking system, it doesn't care. A person looking at your actual resume, you want to make it skimmable because people don't read resumes, they skim them. And so now once they skim it, they might come back and read it in a little more detail if what they see when they skim it looks good to them. So see how I broke this down into some subcategories. Suddenly makes it easier to read again, doesn't it? And in fact, the person skimming this might not even look at the bullets. They just look at the headings on the subcategories. They think, oh, well, that's exactly what we're looking for. Of course we want to interview this person. How do I know what subcategories to use? I look at the job posting. If I were to break this job into 2 to 4 categories, what would those be? Do I have bullets? Do I, you know, is it going to look right? How do I want to word the title of each subcategory? Okay. So just something to keep in mind if you find that you've got a lot of bullets under one position. Okay, a couple other, here you'll see I included some volunteer work because it was highly relevant to the job I was applying for. Education, if you're concerned about ageism, just leave the dates off. That's perfectly fine. And professional development. So I always include a professional development piece. Obviously, as a career development professional, I'm big on professional development, and I will try and practice what I preach. And so I'd like to include evidence of how I'm continuing to develop myself. All right. Wow, that's it. That's all. Okay. 8 steps. Each one, I think, is important. This is a process that developed over time as I worked with alumni of all ages in all fields. And each one of these steps leads to the next one. And if it seems like a lot of work, it is. It is a lot of work, particularly the first time. But keep in mind why we're doing this. Right? We're doing this so that when you apply online, you have maximized the likelihood of making it through all those filters with your targeted resume.
Internal advocates, for me, I think at the level we're looking at here, CFOs, controllers, and directors, network into the position. Go to the FENG brothers and sisters in our directory.
Yep.
Go to LinkedIn. See who you know. See who maybe is a second degree connection who you get introduced to. And say, hey, there's an opportunity over there. I'd like to know a little bit more about it. My accomplishments include requirement 1 of the job, requirement 2 of the job, requirement 3 of the job. Who should I be talking to learn more about this opportunity? Not HR.
Nope.
HR is people. But it's kind of like going to a nice restaurant. You want to talk to the waiter or the waitress who's wearing that linen, napkin or tablecloth around their waist, or do you rather go into the back and talk to the chef who is putting their spices on top of that fish so it can be blackened? That's why you want to get back to the decision maker.
So, the one slide where I talk about resume, internal advocates, developing your professional connections, right? And we focus just on that first column, but the other 2 are really crucial as well.
Sure.